Welcome to an international perspective on the role of point-of-care testing in disaster management. This is Dr. Gerald Koss speaking. These lectures come to you from the Point-of-Care Testing Center for Teaching and Research at the University of California, Davis. Our learning objectives are to understand the role of needs assessment in formulating point-of-care resources for complex emergencies and disasters, to become familiar with environmental factors that can affect diagnostic testing performance, to prepare the point-of-care coordinator for crisis leadership in small world networks, to gain knowledge that will enhance crisis standards of care, prepare the audience, that is you, to comment on new guidelines and help adapt them to local, national, and global needs, and to learn about point-of-care disaster caches, which we will do in the second lecture in this set of two. Our global vision is point-of-care testing will improve crisis standards of care, disaster preparedness, and at the same time, healthcare and small world networks. This slide shows you disposable, handheld, portable, transportable, benchtop or near patient, and monitoring point-of-care technologies. Slide 5 defines point-of-care testing as medical testing at or near the site of care. This definition does not depend on the size or format of device per se. And embedded in our strategies are several fundamental goals: significance, evidence, speed, approach, and impact. And in short, point-of-care testing helps identify critical diagnoses, screen quickly, produce test results for rapid decision-making, accelerate triage and treatment, and enhance response using a variety of new technologies directly at the point of need to ultimately improve medical and economic outcomes. The lecture is divided into 6 segments corresponding to 6 principles. Slide 6 shows you solution, balance, and efficiency, while the next slide 7 shows you evidence, integration, and synthesis. And in each case, I will present the principle in detail before launching into that particular segment of the discussion. Let's discuss principle number 1. Past disasters demonstrate the role and feasibility of using point-of-care testing. Examples include Hurricane Katrina, the Bangkok flood, and Hurricane Sandy. Slide 9 shows you the widespread use of point-of-care testing in Hurricane Katrina. We feel that this event proved the fundamental feasibility of using point-of-care testing in disaster response. The next slide shows the response was a little slow, but nonetheless, the military made good use of different point-of-care devices on ships and other sorts of rescue vehicles. In the upper right of this slide, we show a recommended timeline whereby in the future we feel point-of-care testing could come to the fore a little earlier and, for example, help immediate triage and local rescue response. We'll see how we can strategize this as we move forward in the lecture. We must not forget shelters. Here you see one of the shelters set up after Hurricane Katrina for acute monitoring, the care of chronic diseases in displaced individuals, and public health. And you can see how point-of-care testing devices such as pulse oximeters, glucose meters, and test kits could help during this phase of the recovery. Well, the next slide shows the flooding in Bangkok. I was personally involved in this disaster. The next slide shows the flow of water as it moved from the middle area of Thailand, which experienced torrential downpours, into the Bangkok area to the south. The next slide lists some of the devastation that occurred. And if you look at the middle of the slide, you'll see that a multidisciplinary working group was formed October 21st of the year at the request of the Division of Medical Sciences, Ministry of Public Health. Since I was in country, I was appointed to that group. And this group made various planning strategies and recommendations regarding current and future responses and point of care and laboratory diagnostics. I'll be presenting more details of these strategies later in a general fashion that integrates all of them in our response to disasters. The next slide shows you that almost nobody escaped this sort of problem. And slide 16 shows you the end product, a paper published in the journal Point of Care titled Diagnostic Testing Strategies for Healthcare Delivery During the Great Bangkok Flood and Other Weather Disasters. It just so happens that the majority of disasters associated with weather events, and therefore we will be focusing on them in this lecture. The Bangkok flood, as you can see from the next slide, interrupted all forms of transportation, and therefore ordinary clinical laboratory services were virtually impossible but still needed. So our working group did come up with strategies to deal with specimen transport using large wheel trucks, boats, and other means of transportation. And as a specific example, put live onto PCR platform a test for leptospirosis because that was one of the hazards of being in these sorts of floodwaters. Well, Hurricane Sandy, or Superstorm Sandy, had a huge devastating effect, as you can see in this composite slide. And in the next slide, you'll see a variety of rescue workers who have access to responder point of care testing inventory. And I provided you with this slide to organize the categories of devices, types of tests, what disaster medical assistance teams have in the United States, and what local emergency medical services might have. But in part 2 of these lectures, we'll be looking at how we feel a harmonized, singular approach to the basic supplies that are available might be implemented and even used globally so that different response teams will be familiar with the devices and have the competency and experience to actually use them. Slide 21 wraps up this segment then. Okay, we've shown that point of care testing is feasible. Well, are we likely to see more events such as we've seen in the past? Yes, because, and we have coined a word for these, pneudemics. We define pneudemic as unexpected and disruptive problems that affect the health of large numbers of individuals in a crowded world. The world population has now exceeded 7 billion people, and we see a future that brings a variety of perils and associated tests that are needed for them. We'll talk about test clusters and needs assessment next as a mechanism you can use in your own countries or your own settings to define exactly how to select point-of-care technologies for optimal resilience. Principle 2 is about needs assessment. Parenthetically, let me tell you that in our NIBIB U54 NIH Center, we have developed techniques for needs assessment for point-of-care devices in public health, complex emergencies, and disasters. And in fact, we use the needs assessment and its output to guide what we will fund in the way of new point-of-care technologies to meet our goal of improving resilience and enhancing crisis standards of care. So needs assessment guides point-of-care invention, innovation, and technology development. But please be cautioned. As Henry Ford said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So we really have to think creatively out of the box and work hard to understand how we can address the problem of disaster response. Now, once again, in Lecture 2, which is more of a workshop than anything else because it is a work in progress, you'll have an opportunity to contribute to the design of disaster caches and hopefully tailor them to needs in your own setting and countries. Slide 23 then gives you a little flavor of needs assessment and what we have learned from it. I will summarize from our references. Respondents preferred disaster-ready point-of-care devices that sample blood directly into a test cassette which stores all biohazard material for easy disposal. This confirms common sense, doesn't it? When asked to explain, respondents said they wanted to minimize contamination when performing infectious disease testing outside the laboratory. They also wanted to draw a single sample and have multiple testing options to fully evaluate each victim or patient. And they wanted fast results, battery operation, handheld devices, and high sensitivity testing that they could perform themselves. Well, in fact, again, it seems common sense, but we'll see there are some lessons to learn, for example, about high sensitivity testing in our second lecture, where we discuss how to implement appropriate cardiac troponin tests for the evaluation of victims that experience chest pain during these crises. Slide 24 shows you a Pareto plot. This one was from a needs assessment survey conducted in Phang Nga province by my research associate and myself in the southern coastal provinces of Thailand. From the left then, these people wanted complete blood count, electrolytes, chemistry, blood bank, blood grouping, oxygen saturation, and so on down the line. The stars show you statistically significant differences in the bar heights compared to those to the right. Slide 25 shows you in the top frame that respondents wanted to test for MRSA, and in the bottom frame, swine flu. And in the second lecture, we'll update that for some of the new challenges that we have in influenza testing. The next slide shows that they were concerned about temperature, vibration, humidity, and impact shock, as well as, to the far right, submersion and acceleration for obvious reasons. So these are some of the physical attributes that we need to take into consideration when we're selecting devices or, for that matter, designing them de novo. Slide 27 shows you that respondents preferred sample collection coming from a cassette and a direct sampling method. Slide 28 places the devices directly in the hands of first responders, and you can see how this large bar to the right partitions into the different groups of laboratorians, coordinators, doctors, researchers, industry people, and responders. Let's launch forward then with Principle 3, assuming now that we have established our needs. We're going to next select point-of-care test clusters. These test clusters should allow mission matching. That is, one can select instruments and tests for triage, diagnosis, treatment, and/or monitoring, but devices and reagents must be operated within environmental tolerances and legal constraints specified by the manufacturer. As this lecture moves forward, I think you'll come to appreciate that we have many unsolved problems when it comes to putting point-of-care diagnostic tests and devices directly into the field, and we will address those in a moment. Slide 30 shows you how we've organized functions and targets as part of the crisis care profile into divisions such as energy, conduction, contraction, perfusion, acid, base, and osmolality. And then to the right, we've listed the tests that are of relevance in each category. The tests indicated in green are what is known as CLIA-waived in the United States. And we will show you in the next slide even more categories and more tests that fulfill the role of determining function and allowing evidence-based medicine to be performed at the site of need. I will spend some time in the second lecture, as I mentioned, on cardiac troponin I, a biomarker for acute myocardial infarction. I won't be presenting the details further of slide 32 and 33. Please refer to those. And now let's go to slide 34, which shows point-of-care device requirements for simplicity at the top, and then lists what are essentially the CLIA-waived criteria used in this country, the United States, for the approval of these devices. Let's take the third box on the top from the left, titled Reagents and Materials Preparation. I will read what it says. Reagents and materials are generally stable and reliable, and reagents and materials are prepackaged or pre-measured or require no special handling precautions or storage conditions. So in fact, what you see in these boxes really does set the stage for a lot of point-of-care devices that we could use in complex emergencies and disasters, in demanding that they be not just simple in their use, but also robust. Well, slide 35 gives you an example of temperature extremes seen in disasters. Katrina, hot. Haiti, hot. Japan, cold. And in point of fact, point-of-care reagents may not be able to withstand these sorts of challenges. In slide 36, I've enumerated some of them specifically. Well, we found during Hurricane Katrina that point-of-care testing failed after 1 week of use, primarily due to damage to reagents with storage at 43+ degrees centigrade. On the flip side of the coin, in Springfield, Massachusetts, paramedics complained that cold temperatures caused glucose meters to shut down during emergency response. And then in Haiti, whole blood analyzers, the iStat specifically, were inoperable due to high temperatures. In our center, we have formulated a scientific approach to dealing with this, as shown in slide 37. We have devised temperature and humidity profiles that are applicable to these different sites of major natural disasters, such as Indonesia, New Orleans, Massachusetts area, and Haiti. And we use these, as you see in slide 38, as the driving principles in our environmental stress testing chambers to assess the robustness of point-of-care reagent test strips and cartridges. We're also doing currently a kind of live experiment where we place the device and the operator's hands directly into the chamber that you see in the center through a plastic access window, and then evaluate everything as a package. The point of this is to facilitate device design and to enhance development of disaster guidelines and generally move forward with the principle of harmonization in a global approach to dealing with these disasters. Slide 39 shows you the product of some of our environmental stress testing scientific research to date. This work is largely the result of a series of seminal papers published by Dr. Richard Louie, who is an adjunct professor in the group, and our colleague students. I would encourage you to access these papers directly. I will not present details, but to make a long story short, disasters do present environmental challenges that current technologies are not capable of withstanding. On the flip side of that coin, let's look at slide 40, which describes the cold disaster, the Japanese complex emergency, which involved an earthquake, tsunami, and then nuclear accidents. And in this case, the temperature dropped below 0 degrees centigrade. There were power outages that basically enabled the point of care to become useful, but in fact it was not totally prepared for the event. However, in slide 41 we can see that some systems, such as the ones we have tested, come with onboard heating blocks. This is fairly obvious in that this particular system is intended to measure blood gases and needs that sort of onboard ambient. And slide 42, we summarize some of these different point-of-care devices that include thermal regulation as an onboard principle. While it hasn't been proven in cold disasters, we feel that some of these do have the potential to deal with the cold temperatures. The next slide, 43, is the product of Dr. Rust, one of our collaborators who has invented a container And we are expanding on this basic principle and concept to develop containers that can protect the device, the reagents, and also quality control. We have separately shown that quality control reagents do deteriorate when exposed to high temperatures. This sort of technological development goes hand in hand with development of point-of-care devices themselves, and will be part of our next year effort in our NIH center. At this point, we have covered the first three fundamentals: solution, balance, and efficiency. So now we will move to the second set of three: evidence, integration, and synthesis. If you wish, you can think of this as moving and building a knowledge pyramid with successively more complex things to learn, think about, discuss, and implement. Principle 4 states point-of-care technologies enable evidence-based decision-making at the point of need and also can transfer ownership for personalized medicine there. Slide 45 shows you the span, regional span that is, in a middle set of provinces in Thailand, which we can call a Small World Network, SWN, served by an MMU, or Mobile Medical Unit. This is an approach developed by one of my former students, Professor Wanvisa Boonlart, at Naresuan University in Phitsanulok, which you see indicated on the map as the center of the region, Phitsanulok, Thailand. Slide 46 shows you the MMU, and the next slide makes the point that for point-of-care testing to impact positively medical and economic outcomes, we really want to shift what heretofore might have been empirical judgment and guesswork to actual evidence-based medicine. And this is the theme of this principle. In slide 48, you can see the interior of the truck and how it serves very well patients directly at the site of need. In slide 49, we turn to Australia, with which students of this course in that country would be quite familiar, and Dr. Mark Shepard's notable work, where point-of-care testing, is shown in slide 50, is adaptable and transferable at local Aboriginal women's centers in Australia, even in a tin shed, for the care of themselves and other people that have diabetes and a high risk for that. And in fact, we studied this sort of problem in Thailand, and I show you just in passing in slide 51 the incredibly high hemoglobin A1Cs as shown in these histograms that were observed directly in rural areas where we took a very accurate instrument to test for that at the primary care level. We have developed, as shown in slide 52, care paths that will integrate several forms of point-of-care testing to deal with the diabetes problem. And in slide 53, a direction we hope to take with a new instrument that can do both hemoglobin A1C highly accurately and lipid profiling. And the point of this section is to emphasize the need for direct integration of point-of-care testing in the local settings in which it would be used for resilience. It is much better if the people adopt a sort of point-of-care culture, if you will, and use the devices on a daily basis, become accustomed to them, develop high competency with their use, and then, in fact, that contributes to preparedness at the same time. We've captured this concept in slide 54, where we define point-of-care culture. And in fact, it may be the final frontier for this field. For point-of-care culture is medical empowerment of the individual and family nucleus integrated with norms, behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, expectations, technology, and outcomes. And what could be better if we had this sort of platform already launched and available worldwide in a variety of different communities, so that those communities could actually be their own bosses, so to speak, and muster up their own resilience, not just for complex emergencies and disasters, but for urgencies and emergency medicine as it comes up on a daily basis. So in summary, this principle, we really want to develop concrete, actionable evidence at the site of care where it is needed the most, and we carry that theme in several directions. Let's move on to Principle 5 then, because now we need to plan, we need to make strategies. So we're going to use strategic planning to optimize small world networks where healthcare teams and patients become experienced with point-of-care testing through education, training, and everyday use. Slide 56, the next one, shows you how we construct a point-of-care small world network. In fact, this is a region in Isarn, northeast Thailand, which borders the Mekong River and is a low-resource area. In this case, the lines on the left show you where the EMS people, emergency medical services experts, drew in their ambulance routes where they would pick up patients and take them to local regional centers. Those are the orange lines. And then we have short circuits and other configurations where the patients most in need can be taken to referral centers shown to the left on the map. On the right then, we have skeletonized the small world network in the form of these sorts of conduits and routes that are used by ambulances. And in this setting, unfortunately, there is no or virtually no opportunity for helicopter rescue. Small world networks are defined in slide 57. They are like your family and friends. You have fun and work with them every day, and in times of need, you call on them for assistance. Common examples include 6 degrees of separation between people, social influence networks, and so on, such as roadmaps. Attributes of these networks include that they are connected by at least one short path. They have an overabundance of hubs with high numbers of connections and common connections mediating short path lengths between edges. Their features include that they are developed demographically, match geography, interconnect regionally, reveal healthcare resource disparities, and most importantly, can guide point-of-care testing allocations into the different regions. The next slide shows you a province, Callison, with the small world network core pathways of ambulance travel indicated in black. The following slide then shows a transformation of distance to time. So herein lies some of the core of developing a strategy for the placement of point-of-care testing. The patient, for example, with acute chest pain that lies to the top left in the red zone, and will have a transit time to the regional center of Callison of 2 hours or more, really would benefit from on-site diagnosis of cardiac biomarker testing. And in the next slide, I show you one of the devices that has been now implemented throughout Thailand to deal with this sort of small world network efficiency. And many times over, when we've conducted these surveys in these countries, which include Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and others, physicians have told me that it really is the value of the test that counts. The costs may be high or higher than the conventional laboratory, but in fact, the physicians will say, if I just know what the diagnosis is, then I can triage my patient appropriately and send them for tertiary care in the most expeditious fashion possible. And in those words, they're really telling us the same sort of thing that we would hear in a disaster or complex emergency. The Venn diagram in the next slide then summarizes this concept. For disaster response or emergency medicine on a daily basis, we really want to strategize point-of-care testing in the small world network, and by doing so, as you see in the center area, we also link community preparedness and therefore develop resiliency in the healthcare delivery system defined by the local geography and demography and resources available. Now we will discuss the sixth and last principle in this lecture, value propositions. Herein, we're going to build our strategies to produce actual value that will be critical during responses and recovery. And we will use tactics for placing point-of-care testing appropriately in the physical, demographic, and geographic settings. The corollary to Principle 6 is that if point-of-care testing does not impact decision-making or add value, then do not use it. I'd like to add also something that I include almost always when I present these sorts of strategies, and that is point-of-care testing is not an excuse for inaccuracy. Wherever it is implemented, it should continue the history, tradition, and excellent performance that we've grown accustomed to, produced by the traditional clinical laboratory and the various quality control measures that we use there. In this segment, then I'll obviously be introducing the point-of-care coordinator, because the person that does the testing is part of the quality chain, is an individual who organizes for value but also delivers it directly during the act of point-of-care testing. Slide 63 gives you an example of a value proposition. Point-of-care testing reduces therapeutic turnaround time to speed critical paths. I will present some of the background on therapeutic turnaround time in the second lecture. We know that evidence-based research shows that point-of-care testing and in vivo monitoring decrease TTAT. Fast TTAT improves field and emergency room patient triage, treatment, and transfer, which observers have consistently deemed important during various natural disasters. Thus, rapid TTAT adds value and preparedness to the small world network. The next slide shows you some of the challenges of positioning primary care on the left and even community hospitals on the right in terms of disaster response. In fact, in the tsunami, both of the structures that you see became inundated. The one on the left was in one of the coastal provinces facing the Andaman Sea, and the small community hospital used to have quite an expansive beach in front of it on PP Island, and you see where it is located in the isthmus, such that the tsunami that trapped that isthmus removed tons and tons and tons of material and also resulted in many fatalities. The map shown in slide 65 draws with a red line the coastal areas that were subject to the most extensive damage. And to give you an idea of what this looks like, and these, by the way, these are my own pictures that I took during surveys right after the event. This is a coastal resort in Phang Nga province. And as I mentioned earlier, we did needs assessment in Phang Nga province, both after the device and then several years later, to assess how resilience had been developed, what strategies were used, and what kinds of technologies. I'm going to talk about them a little bit now. But in general, the lectures that you're hearing will reflect a lot of the aggregated knowledge of several researchers who have studied this area. The next slide shows a typical floor plan of a small community hospital. In this case, point-of-care testing is virtually everywhere now, in the emergency room, labor and delivery, operating room, and the central laboratory for that matter becomes near patient testing, because typically it's on the same floor in a small room. The resources there are modest, and staff might not be available 24/7. During the periods when the staff are not immediately available, then much of the diagnostic testing will shift to the emergency room, where we find simple devices such as glucose meters, pregnancy tests, and so on. The next slide shows you more research from the Phang Nga area. These are on the horizontal axis, the different community hospitals in that province. And then on the vertical axis, the number of pulse oximeters or oxygen saturation monitors that we found in place. Slide 69 is a collage of these different devices. The upper left photo is one I took after the tsunami. It shows a very handy little fingertip pulse oximeter that can be used to monitor pulse and oxygen saturation. And you might ask, well, what is the point? What is the point of showing all of these technologies? Well, in fact, these small hospitals cannot afford blood gas instruments, so the pulse oximeter in many of these communities has become the de facto point-of-care device for monitoring the adequacy of oxygenation and ventilation of the victim or patient. The next slide then formalizes this in terms of our results from needs assessment surveys done in follow-up of the tsunami disaster in Thailand, and compares on the left what people wanted for near-patient testing versus for bedside testing on the right. You can see that the rankings are substantially similar, and you can also observe that some of these devices, such as a pulse oximeter and others hopefully that they'll get in the future, are very much in need for monitoring blood gases, electrolytes, oxygenation, dealing with cardiac troponin, markers of acute myocardial infarction, and so on. The theme then is that by having point-of-care testing appropriately positioned in the community hospital and having the right and the needed devices, we are going to improve the value of the healthcare product that is delivered there. In slide 71 then, we're talking about tactical point-of-care testing. We're going to optimize practitioner experience with these devices, so tactically, POCT should complement healthcare delivery resources, fulfill needs for simultaneous emergency care and disaster preparedness, and match geographic isolation, current or anticipated. Of course, isolation was a horrific problem during the tsunami, and some small community hospitals quickly depleted reagents, drugs, and other resources. And as well, because of the flooding, physicians and people that normally would be on duty, and that particular tsunami hit on a Sunday morning, were not able to get to the hospitals. Therefore, routine daily use of point-of-care testing can help assure high quality of trained operators who become point-of-care coordinators and integrate POCT within and between the small world networks. So at this point, I would like to drill down on the point-of-care coordinator and launch that with slide 72 that shows the absolutely critical role that this individual has in preparedness, post-disaster functions, leadership, telecertification, and other duties. This work was contributed by Peggy Mann in the paper cited at the bottom, published in the Point of Care Journal. And you can see from the general flow here the essential need to start early, initiate training, support, coach, troubleshoot, recertify, and validate, and then on an annual basis turn this circle so that everybody involved understands the test sites, compliance, standards and regulations, and so on that make up for a completely integrated approach. In the next slide, 73, Peggy offers her view of the types of tests that would be needed in these disasters. And then in the next three slides, 74 through 76, I've summarized the essential skills of the point-of-care coordinator. I'll go through some of them on this first slide. I won't cover all the details in the next slides that follow. The point-of-care coordinator will perform needs assessment in advance of a crisis. We've gotten a taste of that earlier in this lecture, where it's been formalized, and I've shown you some of the statistically valid results that have been produced. The point of care coordinator will participate in writing the emergency plan, periodically drill this plan, assess response, and revise it to improve the quality. We'll do annual gap analysis to identify and eliminate weak preparedness areas of high risk. We'll communicate with surrounding communities in the Small World Network and regionally. We'll guarantee the competency of operators who respond outside the hospital. In the second lecture, I'm going to address disaster caches, and even in that case, it's important that the operators are trained, are valid for the particular device, and that that information is checked before they can operate a point-of-care device taken from a disaster cache. Well, further, the point-of-care coordinator will outline the whole process, who is in charge, and the command center. Slide 75 lists additional attributes of this person and the high-level responsibility that is necessary. Some of these come without saying, such as a need for someone who can problem solve and troubleshoot, and then someone who can deal with training, standardization of supplies, and alert colleagues to various telecommunications features such as username and passwords that are needed for accessibility. Slide 76 continues with a long list for this individual or group of individuals who very importantly must connect test results with the electronic medical record in real time and after the event. And this is quite a challenge. We don't have yet a solution to connectivity of point-of-care devices in disaster settings. Well, let's move forward then and take a look at what should be the basis for operation of the point-of-care coordinator. That is the emergency plan. Again, Ms. Mann has contributed this concept of developing a plan, drilling down on it, checking it, documenting the effectiveness, and as you turn the loop, then revising the plan, passing through the whole circle again and accepting changes so that finally before the event occurs, and I emphasize before, we have something that works quite well. So now we have really integrated a lot of value into our basic approach to point-of-care disaster and emergency medicine. Slide 78 emphasizes that these value propositions will use point-of-care testing in high-impact sites, will take into consideration physical, demographic, and geographic attributes. Slide 79 provides you with a little look of what we think will be the future of the point-of-care coordinator, who in the upper left you'll see will be facilitated by actual device connectivity, telecommunications, Bluetooth, and other forms, such that in the right area, should a disaster hit, there will be a kind of cloud. That's our medical GIS, Geographic Information System, that will be talking to all these different locations. And as you see with numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, could redirect point-of-care resources to, say, a crush injury in 1, where they know that there's an impassable bridge, and then take resources from the community hospital and equip this point-of-care responder in 3 with a route that actually serves a fast therapeutic turnaround time. Then we've also shown an ACF, or alternate care facility, in this schematic, and ideally helicopter rescue would work out of that temporary facility. The next slide, 80, generalizes the concept to even more challenging geographies. This is the 18,000 or so islands in the Indonesia group. And in that case, we would hope to have a GIS, a point-of-care coordinator, both personnel and technological, coordinating the action of mobile labs like the MMU that we showed you, used in Thailand, hubs. I've shown one near Jakarta, which are basically the highly connected areas where we're going to invest point-of-care resources. And then alternate care facilities, which you see as an inset providing a number of functions and placement of point-of-care testing such that the environment is a little better controlled than just being out in the field. In fact, many of the resources of the United States disaster cache that we'll see in the second lecture are really intended to go into some kind of controlled environment setting, such as a tent or a structure, or in our portrayal, an alternate care facility with a lot of ergonomics. Well, connecting it all would be the MGIS shown in the little cloud. And in the next slide, we're going to tie that together with our view of the future of this area, cybernetic infrastructure-driven point-of-care response. We'll see what we can do to work on this in the next few years, but this, you might say, is our dream, where we're really going to have rapid differentiation of the crisis and its magnitude. We're going to treat the injured small world network and transform it to a responding SWN. We're going to have virtual integration of crisis knowledge, and all of that will produce better outcomes through synthesis. Meanwhile, we're going to implement things appropriately in the alternate care facility. The Venn diagram in slide 82 then wraps up this segment of my presentation, showing now that we're going to integrate the small world network on the left with point-of-care testing and the geographic information system at the high function level to achieve what we really want to achieve. That is, in the center, rapid informed decision-making at the site of care. I hope you've enjoyed this first lecture. I'll now conclude with slide 83, convinced that we really can have an impact and change the future of resiliency, preparedness, and disaster response. First, point-of-care coordinators can and should take responsibility for proper training, quality assurance, and test performance that will enhance standards of care both routinely and during crises. Second, needs assessment and this research describe point-of-care designs for emergency and disaster settings, reveal which devices and reagents can be used in different climates, and identify test clusters necessary for critical decision-making. Remember, we are working on a program in the next year to develop appropriate thermal regulation containers to protect devices, reagents, and quality control materials from temperature and humidity extremes. And we've had the good fortune of some manufacturers in the United States stepping forth with new foil packaging on reagents such that will meet the needs of the temperature profiles and preserve the function of these reagents when on actual sites and disasters. The third bullet then, regardless of location, innovative point-of-care technologies empower people for personalized medicine and evidence-based practice, even under dire circumstances, and therefore should be harmonized globally. Perhaps it's too much of a stretch to suggest in this lecture that the whole area of point-of-care disaster caches and the way we handle them and strategize them should be harmonized globally, but in fact, I think there is the prospect for this, and in my second lecture, I'll show you some of the basis for that thinking. The next bullet, small world networks plus flexibly equipped hubs plus strategically placed point-of-care testing create value. That is, efficient urgent emergency care, cost-effective disaster preparedness, and appropriate national disaster caches. So the picture here is one of a holistic approach rather than an incremental or piecemeal or partial approach where we're going to embed our resiliency directly in the community by appropriately placing point-of-care, training people, developing the point-of-care coordinator expertise and background that are necessary to implement things in times of crisis. This is really how we feel we're going to enhance crisis standards of care. Now, we do have a work in progress I want to make you aware of. It's titled Emergency and Disaster Point-of-Care Testing. It is a CLSI guideline, POCT 15. CLSI stands for Clinical and Laboratory Standards Institute. And this guideline will soon be available for public comment. So I invite you and hope that you will review and contribute to this guideline, which is intended to be a global guideline providing many of the principles that you've heard in this lecture and carrying us forward into a safer future. Thank you for your attention and have a good day.